One, two, three.
The following is an audio exclusive featuring the full uncut conversation from our episode Powerlands, Indigenous Youth Fight Big Oil and Gas Worldwide.
Seven languages, three continents. The film Powerlands is not your usual documentary. In it, director Ivey-Camille Manybeads Tso travels from her home in the southwest of the U.S. to Colombia, the Philippines, Mexico, and the Standing Rock Reservation to meet indigenous people up against big extractive corporations. The communities she visits are all deeply connected to their local, specific places and people and cultures. They're linked, too, in that they're being ravaged by some of the very same corporations, with names like, well, among them, Peabody Coal and BHP Petroleum. Powerlands paints a picture of places in struggle that are building power in parallel with one another. Is what she's tracing a sort of trans-local and trans-generational indigenous movement that is building across the continents? And can it succeed against the most powerful corporations on Earth? According to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's latest and last report, 21st century humans must either transform or burn up. So do the people of the Powerlands have lessons to teach us all? 7 years ago, the Laura Flanders Show aired a report based on some of the early footage gathered for Powerlands. Today, I'm excited to welcome to the program Ivey-Camille Manybeads Tso, the director, and Kim Smith, one of the organizers who appears in the film. They are both back with the finished product that is already winning awards. Ivey-Camille is a self-described queer Navajo filmmaker. Kim Smith is a community organizer. They are both members of the Diné, or Navajo Nation. Powerlands, produced by our former producer Jordan Flaherty, along with Eva Jashevitz, with Emily Faye Ratner, with music by Daniel French, is available for streaming through Fuse now. Well, to kick things off, here is the beginning of the documentary Powerlands, where Ivey-Camille Manybeads Tso introduces us to the journey she's about to take.
My family can trace our history to 85 generations with this land. I began working on this film to document our community's struggle against resource colonization. Along the way, I found that we are not alone. This is a story of Indigenous people protecting and rebuilding. Multinational corporations like Glencore, Peabody, and BHP have been extracting hundreds of billions of dollars in profit. It is happening in nearly every country on Earth. First came colonization. Now corporations are stealing the resources from under our feet. This extraction is global, but so is our resistance. From Taneta, I connected with Indigenous people in Colombia, the Philippines, and Mexico, who are uniting to protect the Earth. We are appealing to public opinion, changing laws, and putting our bodies on the line. This film is part of that resistance.
Welcome, both of you. Kim, Ivey-Camille, welcome to the program. Congratulations on the film. What a journey the film has been on since we last saw any glimpse of it. And what a journey you've been on, Ivey-Camille. Let's start with you. Did I read right that you started this film when you were 19 years old? What set you off on your project?
So we started at 19, and actually Jordan and I met in Flagstaff, Arizona at this great little vegan Thai restaurant called Red Curry. If you're ever there, go there. It's the best. And we sat for like 2 hours, and he had just come back from Colombia, and mutual friends had put us in contact, and we were talking about the differences and similarities between Black Mesa and Colombia. And I'm from Black Mesa. It's where I was born, raised. I was that 9-year-old kid in elementary school being like, cool. And everyone around me was like, what is that? And so the conversation really began rolling, and we found that there were more similarities than there were differences, from the food to the clothing to even the same corporation was affecting both of these communities. And that's really where it really began. And at first we started to look, should we follow the corporation? Do we follow an emotional journey? What do we go with? And then we reached out to like 20 different communities all over in order to get everything down and finalized. And it was a lot of just like communication back and forth, making sure that people actively wanted us there before filming, during filming, and then even before screening, especially in places like the Philippines and Colombia, where it's so detrimental to people's lives, to make sure that the story is told accurately.
Well, it's been the situation that you are both coming from is very personal. And I'd love you to talk just a little bit about how the industries you're up against have shaped your lives. You have your guests, your subjects, your colleagues in the documentary talk poignantly about what they're up against. But if, Kim, you were to tell your story of how coal has affected you, what would you say?
Ariel. First, I'd like to say thank you for having me on your show. I am a huge fan of PBS. It was a big part of my upbringing. We had like 5 channels, and that was the one that I would always watch. So it's such an honor to be on here. My name is Kim Smith. I come from the Diné Nation. I come from on the Arizona side, St. Michael's, Arizona, and then on the New Mexico side from Mayambato, New Mexico. And really, it is a part of the huge hub of extractive industries that power the Southwest. 3 miles east of me is one of the biggest open pit coal mines. And then 2 miles to the south of me is El Paso gas line, which, connects the Permian Basin to the greater Southwest region. And, this has really just affected my life tremendously. First of all, through health impacts. I have an autoimmune disease that, is known to come from extractive industries. There is cancer and different diseases from the extractive industry in my family and in my community. And so aside from that, there is a lot of policy, both within the national level, regional level, and tribal level, that is really pushing to continue those extractive industries to be powered by our nation and by our resources.
And what about you, Ivey-Camille? In what ways is this a personal story for you around coal?
Yeah, so I'm from Black Mesa. That's where my mom and dad met. My grandmother Meso has been fighting this resistance since the beginning. I'm from the HPL side, the Hopi partition land side. In that before the 1960s, it was NPL, Navajo partition lands. And so my entire life, I've seen my entire family get forcibly relocated off of this region, losing their house, their cattle, and friends and family throughout everything, as well as seeing the health impacts that happen all across the board. But also growing up, having a white side and growing up in town in Flagstaff, I also see the long-term effects that this polluting can do, not just in these communities. We are seeing how the depletion of the water from the aquifer underneath, how it's affecting the entire Southwest region through fires and floods. And all of this is just going to have like long-term effects on the land and on people.
Now, these petition lines that you talked about, for people that don't know, what were they, what are they, and how did they change the landscape?
Yeah, so in the early 1950s, when the starts were talking between the federal government mining coalitions and the Navajo and Hopi nations, the Navajo Nation said no, and the Hopi Nation said yes. So they went in, and on top of, if you took a res map and you took a mineral map and laid them on top of each other, you would see where the coal seam was where the reservation line was redrawn along the coal seam. And that was given towards Hopi partition lands. And it was a way to separate and isolate 2 sister tribes and to force us to become like enemies in a way and throw everything back at each other instead of looking at the larger problem, which was the the land redistribution as well as the corporation Peabody and BHP. So then I fell onto the side of the line that got altered and changed, HBL.
It seems interesting that your story begins as you just described it, and your film, it seems to me, has the agenda of bringing people together, if not physically, at least in the same film, to connect people, to show the connections that exist across borderlands, across cultures, languages, you name it, 7 languages in the film. Wow. Is that part of the motivation, or was there a sort of family prompt to do the work that you do, Ivey-Camille?
So I was raised with the idea of ke, which is this Navajo word that means relationships, being all around us, being all of us. And there's even this thing, community, that people are working with right now, because the best or the simplest translation is relationship. It embodies so much more, but it's that thing that we all have with each other and with the air and with the plants around us and with the water around us. And so I've always looked at it as, instead of separation, always being a part of a larger community. And so that was just it. It wasn't trying to be like a community agenda. It's just, that's how I was raised to be, and to know that if anything's going to happen, it has to be done in solidarity.
And that sounds like part of your message too, right, Kim?
Yeah, I also just want to add like what the visualization of it, like, of our homelands looks like. Our homelands are the size of Ireland. And as Ivey-Camille was mentioning, the Hopi Nation is like right smack in the middle. And so if you think about the size of the landmass of Ireland, that will kind of give you an idea of how massive our homeland is. Ancestrally, it goes into so-called Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, and Colorado. And so we're talking a very huge amount of land that is rich in oil, gas, coal, uranium, water. We have a lot of resources. So I just wanted to like make sure that, folks understand how big of a place that we're talking.
No, I was just reminded as you spoke that the landscape that some people have in their heads right now, having seen the film Oppenheimer, is of this entirely unpopulated native land that is not called that. I just wondered, listening to you, whether you'd had thoughts about the representation of your homelands in popular culture these days, and what difference it makes for you to be telling these stories.
It makes a huge difference. Well, one thing that I have to say about our homelands is that we're considered a national sacrifice zone, like by the federal government. And so what that means is it opens up industry to come in and do their exploratory drilling, to do all of these things. And so that partly is why there has been the largest uranium spill in this nation on Diné land. And so the misrepresentation is huge. I didn't see the movie, but I definitely saw the backlash from people talking about how it doesn't show all sides of the story. It shows it as this glorious moneymaker, but really our people are really still dealing with the cancer rates, with the contaminated water, with the contaminated soil, with people living in radiating homes and schools, so there's all of these things that are underlying. And then on top of that, we don't see any of these reparations from the film industry, from the energy industry, from the federal government, after basically experimenting on us and continuing to. And so there is definitely a huge, and continues to be a huge, representation of Indigenous people in mainstream media.
So that's partly what makes your film so important, Ivey-Camille. But if you could explain a little bit why you decide to tell more than just the Black Mesa story. And I don't mean to say just, it's a huge story. But from there, you travel all across the continent and to the Philippines. Why?
Really, because after that conversation with Jordan, it was so clearly obvious that my community, because at times I've come from a very limited worldview, growing up on the res without running water, without electricity, a lot of the times without media that a lot of other folks would have gotten at a much younger age than I did. And so there were certain things that especially being so young, started this, that I just really didn't comprehend all the way fully. And so talking to Jordan about Colombia, that's really when it was like, oh my God, where else is this happening? And it turned out that it's happening everywhere. It's happening across England, it's happening across Ireland, it's happening across Canada and Mexico and South America and North America, and every single continent, every single place on earth, there's some form of extraction that is happening. And so in that beginning, and that's really where it went down to, was one, not to like educate those who already know, to remind them that we are still here, to remind each other that we are still here and we all support each other. And if you are in solidarity, if you are fighting, we are currently still here together and we still honor you in support. But also to ask people, what can you do in your own backyard? What can you do to make a difference where you are? Is it something simple as carrying a clean, dry pair of socks? Helping a single mother in your apartment building with babysitting so she can get to work? Is it opening up your doors when you make too much spaghetti to your neighbors who have a harder time feeding their 7 kids? Who knows? It's all these simple acts. It is also going to school and educating. It is frontline work. It is political work. It is so much work, and everything needs to be done on a wider scale. And I think that's really where it came down to, was just looking and seeing. It was an educational process for me the entire step of the way. I didn't know all of this at the time, and I'm still constantly learning, you know?
Was it just coincidence that everywhere you went, women seemed to be in leadership of these resistance struggles?
Yeah, that was it. And honestly, it happens way more frequently. Navajo is a matriarchal society. I always grew up with the women commanding the room, and I never questioned it. And it wasn't really until other people started watching the film that they were like, hey, there's like a lot of women. And I was like, oh, I guess you're right. Yup. That's just how it was. And community isn't, like a gendered thing. It is about who is willing to put themselves out there, who is fighting for someone. And a lot of times that often comes and starts with mothers or grandmothers or aunties, as I am for few, and so that's really where it comes from, is from love and from caring and for wanting something better for somebody else.
Kim, when we last saw you, and you're again in the film still, the work you were doing with young people was so moving and striking to so many people who watched our episode, and they'll see it again in Powerlands. How Powerlands? How does your work as an organizer across generations intersect with this work of the movie? And what's happened in the period since we last saw you?
Yeah, so it's been almost 9 years since Ivey-Camille and Jordan came out to film. And so it's almost been a decade. Since then, I have really focused more on solutions back home. And it just, during the film or after the film, I did a lot of visiting of Indigenous resistance camps. I went to Unistoten, Leilu Island. That's what led me to Standing Rock, the Buffalo Field Campaign, the RNC, all of these different places, resistance camps, and helping in the kitchen. I do a lot of food work, and food really is like such medicine for the soul. And a lot of times when you're on the front lines, you don't really have a good meal. And so it was really our goal to go into these places and help folks in solidarity by bringing food, or as Ivey-Camille mentioned, helping folks in the streets, like with the folks that were displaced during the RNC. They push all of the unsheltered folks out of sight, out of mind type of thing. And so we just wanted to make sure that everybody was warm, that they have food. And so this really led me to understand and study, maybe not study, but really see how other resistance movements are, what they're resisting, how they're resisting, and really see the intersects and then really compare it to my own community and how we're trying to defend the land. And so it just came to this. And then after that, I started this traveling art exhibition called The Art of Indigenous Resistance, where I was collecting art from these different places that I was visiting, and meeting these different artists. And, I had this idea of creating an art exhibition that would show people what Indigenous people are fighting and what that looks like through their art. And it was primarily shown in metropolitan areas to really challenge folks in the city, this is where your energy comes on when you turn on the light switch, or this is where your water is coming from when you turn on the faucet. And so just really giving them that visual. And then I started thinking about my carbon footprint and thinking about what I'm telling people. And one of the things that I always told people is we really have to check our energy privileges. Like, how much energy are we consuming on the daily? How are we traveling? And I didn't want to be a hypocrite. And so then that meant me really checking myself and understanding, well, what's really happening in my backyard? I know what's happening historically. I know, like, academically what I've learned and whatnot, but that really is what led me back home. And one of the biggest things that we have a lack of is infrastructure. There's a huge lack of infrastructure in our communities, and housing is one of them. There's a huge housing crisis. And it came to the point where it's like, why am I going to all of these places when I don't really have a roof over my head? And so from that, it started this process of like, how do I move home? What does that look like? And then it goes into the policy of the relationship between the federal government and my people. What does that look like? How do I get land? Do I even get land? And so it became this deep digging of getting through that process, and understanding that a lot of the land that where my family is contaminated by either the extractive industries or by trash, like illegal landfills, because there's, as I mentioned, there's not a lot of infrastructure. So we don't have waste management or garbage pickup and things like that. And so the first step was really looking at what types of toxins are in the soil, what types of toxins are in the water. If we wanted to live a pre-colonial life, will we even be able to do that with the soil and with the water that we have? And so that's where it started, is really studying what types of things are in the soil and in the water, but also slowing down the water so that we can do catchment systems, so that we can start farming and living off of the land. And it turned into become this huge, like, archaeological dig, because we're literally cleaning up. We've cleaned up about 5 acres of illegal landfills in the area that we're building sustainable structures. And so it was literally going through my community's trash. And of course, the top layer is all like modern plastics, all of these everyday things that we use. And then it started getting to metal, and then glass and tin, old lumber, wagon wheels. And so it really taught me about my community from a very intimate way, and intimate.
Really? Talk about going deep. Were there things that surprised you that you learned from the film around people doing similar sorts of resistance in Mexico, the Philippines, Colombia? Kim, and then Ivey-Camille?
Go ahead, Ivy.
Yeah, I definitely think it's one of the movements that has really happened. There's been this huge push for decolonization. I like to use the word re-indigenize, because decolonization means to take or lose something at this point. And there's so many of us here, we can't just like kick everyone out. England isn't large enough. And so I really like to think of re-indigenizing, and what Kim is talking about is exactly that. How do we go back? How do we take something that needs to be cared for again, needs to have that love, put back into its space. And so that's exactly it. It's working with the land. We saw it in Oaxaca with their community work that they were doing. I mean, part of their way of resistance was literally just pulling trees into the road to like help block cars. And that was really amazing and really beautiful to see them rallying around the sandbars. Seeing it in the Philippines, they're using it with their plants and their medicines, and they're bringing everyone back to care for these plants that have been in this area for generations and generations. And to see that same work going on across the world, and even while being on tour, going to England and seeing folks there trying to find sustainability and go back to more of their, pre-colonized roots, because England was also colonized. And so looking at all of that and seeing all of these spaces, seeing so many people in so many spaces truly want to go and return to a more natural and connected time is definitely, I think, possible.
It's a possible, viable way for us to go. And one of the questions that you raise in the film is, how much opportunity are we going to have to explore some of these possibilities? And that sense of urgency is raised as well. You do take yourself to the Standing Rock Reservation during the 2016 mobilizations against the Dakota Access Pipeline. Let's take another look at the film. Here's a clip from the trailer that shows some of that mobilization. Kim Smith, our guest, appears in the clip along with the revered elder LaDonna Brave Bull Allard, who was a matriarch of the water protector movement at that time and in those protests. Here's a clip from Powerlands.
They're trying to say we don't exist. We are indigenous people to this land. We have the roots growing right out of our feet. We belong here.
It's not just our community that's affected this way. There's so many indigenous communities. There's so many people of color that have to face these realities every day.
We are not separate from our environment, and we have been damaged in this whole process of being colonized.
We show up to actions with just ourselves, with our prayers, with our voices, and that's power. That's the power that makes them shiver in their little SWAT gear.
You put our backs against the wall, we put one foot in front of the other, and we face the storm like our brothers, the buffalo. We face the storm. We are not backing down ever again.
Clearly, what you've described, both of you, spans the gamut from backyard mobilizing, digging in the dirt, learning really about where you are right now, and participating in these big mobilizations. Where's the balance? How do these two interrelate? Ivey-Camille.
I think it's all connected. I think that focusing too heavily on one aspect of resistance is not viable. It's easy for us to get lost sometimes in specific aspects. I think all of it's necessary. Also, it's tiring for those of us. You can't be on the front lines 24/7. It is exhausting. You can't be constantly screaming and yelling at people in courtrooms trying to get policy reform. It's exhausting. And so having breaks, having different outlets, having returning back to the land work or art or just community-based is all very necessary in order to keep moving forward.
Standing Rock did change things, though, for the movement and also on the ground. Kim, you were one of the first people, I think, there in that mobilization, setting up that kitchen that you referred to. How do you assess the difference that the Standing Rock mobilization and the reaction to it made, both there in the Dakotas and where you are?
Well, Standing Rock really showed us what is to come, especially when you look at the police state, the military force, imperialism in this country. And, not only did we learn a lot, but the police state learned a lot about what our resistance looks like. And quite frankly, they have $1 billion budget and we don't have that kind of budget. And so it's really eye-opening, and you're seeing it all over the world that, the militarization in the police state have all of this heavy machinery to take and kill what they see is in their path. And so that's something that's really eye-opening. That is also one thing that we understand is that a lot of our comrades are now caught up in the prison system. If you're in the front lines, you are now considered an eco-terrorist. And so they're really coming down hard on us. And so it is really important, as Ivey-Camille had mentioned, for us to really be home and look at how are we going to defend our homelands? What does that look like? And that was one thing that Standing Rock really taught us, is that there's power in numbers. And if you have a plan, if you have a prayer, like LaDonna did, then, there's a means to stop it. But also, it's not anything that is in the past. DAPL still needs our help. There still needs to be resistance to DAPL, as well as all of these other projects that are happening. It's a continuous thing. It's not something in the past. And that's also something that always happens in mainstream media, is that Indigenous people are something of the past, but we're not. We're still here, and our struggles are still here.
You mentioned money, and that put me in mind of the Biden administration's announced green transition funds. And we should say that there's been a lot of change come to your homelands there at the Diné, in that I think it's 3 of the big plants have closed. Coal-fired plants feeding the Southwest there are closing, at least. There is this money being announced. Will Indigenous organizers, activists, the community be seeing any of that, Ivey-Camille?
No, we won't. We won't. So the process to get any type of federal grants, it's like it's not accessible to our people. There is a lot of criteria that you have to go through. And so, yeah, it'll go to like places like Navajo EPA, who wants to drill baby drill. Like there's all these different things that our nation stands for that folks on the ground don't. And so the accessibility to these funds, yeah, it's grand. There's 30 by 30. There's all of these things that the Biden administration said, and yeah, we're seeing some of the money through our roads and things like that, but nothing when it comes to healthcare, nothing when it comes to like any type of cleanup, especially when it comes to like, let's say, the San Juan generating station, the Navajo generating station. These are power plants that have closed, and some of the work that we do is making sure that these states are including Indigenous peoples in the negotiations, but also making sure that there are reparations that go to our communities on our terms, not our government's terms, not the federal government's terms or the state's terms. And a huge part of the funding isn't going to health when our health is heavily impacted for generations.
So would, for example, that New Mexico 2019 Energy Transition Act be different if you'd had a say in it?
Well, we fought when the original Energy Transition Act had no mention of Indigenous people. And so Nihi, our organization, we went tooth and nail with not only the state of New Mexico, but also the environmental groups like 350.org, Sierra Club, who basically are in these spaces greenwashing, but they want to continue to support oil and gas development. They're really pushing for electric vehicles in the state of New Mexico, but where are they going to get the materials or the minerals to create the electric cars and the solar power? So it just becomes this like trade-off, and we won't compromise, and they will.
So coming to you, Ivey-Camille, you have said in your discussion of Powerlands, which screened during Climate Week in New York and is getting awards and winning acclaim, you've said that it is a kind of how-to guide in some ways. That being the case, what would you lift up as tactics that have emerged during your research that you think are particularly interesting or potentially fruitful?
Well, I think there's so many different types. Again, community organization, as we see in Oaxaca. There's also the, more radical violent side that we saw in the Philippines with NPA, New People's Army, which brings up the question, is it more violent to not pick up arms when you are being threatened with violence at all times? And so then we also see peaceful protest through Standing Rock, and we see community work in Black Mesa. I think there's so many different types. And actually, while on tour, I found my favorite type ever, which was in this it's a small town in northern England called Preston, England. And several years ago, they were about to get hit with a whole bunch of fracking, and there's a bunch of fault lines that go through, so it cause earthquakes. So all of these women who were in their 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s dressed themselves up to look as old as possible and would go to the fracking sites and stay in a circle and knit themselves together. And then when the police showed up to remove them, they'd be like, oh no, we seem to have knit ourselves together. We're just old women. But they would call the journalists ahead of a time. So then the journalists would show up and be like, oh my God, police attack knitting nanas. And it was just incredible. They wound up getting a fracking ban put into place, which recently got overturned, and they're back at it. And it's just that, seeing there's so much ingenuity. I think every community needs something that is catered towards it. Even looking like with what's happening on Navajo Nation, a great reminder is that we didn't set up our own governing systems. They were set up by BIA and by the larger federal government. If we actually had a say in our governing bodies and what we want, we would have so many better things happening. We can see it happening in medical facilities like Sacred Peaks and Flagstaff, which is completely run by grants and does not go through the IHS Indians like health services very much anymore. They provide so much more to the community because it's run by the community. And it's one of the best healthcare systems that I've seen on any reservation. So when we have the chance, when we have the ability, and we already have the ability, it's more that when we are either not shutting up enough that they can't ignore us anymore, or if we just go and do it ourselves, we see how incredible any of these systems can be. When we do not follow the rules get changed.
Which takes me back to the Building Society 5-year pilot project that you touched on for a second there, Kim, when you were talking about housing. Can you just elaborate a little bit on what the Building Society there in Navajo Nation is?
Yeah, so we started a building society. As I mentioned, the first part of it was like cleaning up the soil and the water, to then road management, to be able, and then 2 years later to actually be able to start building. But the idea is to reintroduce building societies, because that is essentially how we lived. That's how our ancestors lived. Communally, everybody had a roof over their head, everybody had food to eat, and it was a collective community, and also a sustainable one. Homes were built out of adobe. Our plans are to build ancestral homes, one out of adobe, one out of earth bag, one out of straw bale, and then another out of hemp. And so it's like trying these different sustainable techniques for tiny home living. And in society today, it's like bigger is better, and people are aspiring to build like things they see on HGTV or whatever. But the reality is that we know that the earth can't sustain that. And so our hope is to be able to encourage people to move home and live sustainably as our ancestors did. And that is really I think one of the biggest solutions for my people, especially when it comes to young people, is to move home. Because if we're not moving home, then it's easier for industries to come in and exploit the land. There's much power in numbers, and that's really how an economy works. Is an economy is strong when its people are, investing, and it really goes into policy as well. Like, we can really change the policies if we have the power of numbers back home. And right now, there seems to be a small percentage of young folks that are there, and a majority of boomers and older folks that have also established and uphold the imperialistic system that is, replicated by the federal government's system.
Which takes me back to you, Ivey-Camille, as we close. I mean, as we're closing, we're touching on the same issue that you raised at the very beginning, that while white America may see indigenous nations as kind of homogenous, they have been divided and conquered, split one against the other over the generations. In your film, I suggested at the top that you see parallel movement building, a sort of transgenerational, translocal sort of power development. Is that just a function of the film? Or do you think that there is actually a parallel power building effort underway? Are the movements that you wrote about, or rather that you reported on, seeing themselves in relation to one another in real life, or only in your film? And are any of those divisions inside Navajo Nation itself, well, there in the Southwest, being mended?
Well, in a large way, we have to remember that a lot of these communities do not have running water, do not have electricity, don't have Wi-Fi. So they're not getting the same resources of being updated on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok about what's happening around the world. A lot of the times their news sources are very limited or, quite frankly, propaganda in one way. And so in a way, most of these communities are very isolated and did not know about each other. At the same time, all of us understand there is a global scale. And when walking into a space and seeing a resistance and hearing somebody else from that resistance or hearing someone else, we all understand that same language, even if we aren't speaking the same language. Walking into a room with anywhere and any type of resistance, there was acceptance and love and a drive to want to help, not just in their own community, but in my community, and other communities going forward. And every time that we spread and we talk about it, and more people are getting access to cell phones and to these ways in which communication can grow, we're seeing this huge transcontinental movement that is forming. In Oaxaca with wind power, we are seeing that the community wind farms are now working with organizations in Spain around community wind farms, and that's incredible. We are seeing this become a larger movement. The win that happened last October in Colombia, in their court system that was going towards requiring mining corporations to clean up after themselves. That's huge for every place on the planet who is currently affected by mining, because mining corporations are not required to clean up after themselves, which is insane. That gigantic pipeline that we see in the film in Black Mesa will be there forever. It's not something that's going away unless there's a call that is answered by these corporations, and we're putting the call out and more people are picking up. So we're seeing this large global scale of everyone getting involved. It's been going on for so long. We've all been holding down the fort for hundreds and hundreds of years of trying to call for respect for humanity and for the earth. And so it's already been going, and we are now hitting a point when it is easier for all of us to talk about this one-on-one. And I think we're seeing what's really happening with that, with Colombia and Oaxaca and Black Mesa and Standing Rock and everywhere else that it's going. We're seeing more and more people being concerned about how lithium is being mined, how different minerals are being mined, and even what does carbon footprints mean? Where did this term carbon footprint come from? It was a term that was coined in order to shame the individual instead of hold the corporation accountable. There are all of these things that we are looking at, and yes, we need to take care of our own carbon footprint, but us, instead of looking inwards, we need to be looking outwards, and all of us looking outwards means that we can see each other.
Beautiful. We close these episodes, these conversations often with the question about the future. What will be the story that the future tells of now? Maybe what is the story the future is already telling? What do you think, Kim? What do you think is the story of this moment?
If I tell you how I really feel, I don't want to make you all feel so guilty, but we really have to walk our talk. The reality is we're all participating in this system that is basically sucking the earth dry. We use our phones every day. We're on the internet now, and people are saying that technology is the future, but it's not. That's literally what is killing the earth. And until we realize that and really take active steps to figure out how we as individuals are trying to think about the future or think about healing the earth, then it's never going to happen, because we're living with such entitlement and privilege that we just want more and more and more and more. And that's really how the American capitalistic system is set up, so that it's really teaching us that the more we have, the better. And so if we can figure out in our own lives how we can resist that, that's where the true liberation is, because that's really how they have us, in chains, is that we're falling for it. And the way the future is now is what's in store for the future now is really scary. Because what I've learned in the work that I'm doing is that the trees are dying in the forest that I grew up in. Water is becoming more and more scarce. In my community, the water is contaminated, and there's still a lot more work that has to be done. But the more that, technology and all this greenwashing that is happening, the more extraction that will come to our communities and other Indigenous communities around the world. And so it's like really critically looking at ourselves and how we're going to walk our talk.
Are we? What do you think, Ivy-Camille? What do you think is the story the future will tell of now?
I think there's a lot that it's going to be told of now. I think it's going to be one that I hope is told is how we find a way to, really go towards. I like to tell people about this movement called Solar Core, which is this idea of science, environmentalism working together in tandem to create a better future, where things aren't being extractive, where things are going back to these roots. There are so many stories that we hear and see currently about like the apocalypse or all of these things. And it's giving this media and this narrative that we are continuing to perpetuate because we're all in fear. And so I always try to drive people to go towards remembering that there is a balance. And it comes from community and it comes from understanding how the earth works. And we're seeing the earth has and will always stay here no matter what. We fade on, and that's all that there is. And so our story will be left in what we leave behind. And if we want it to be a good one, we have to work on making it a more sustainable planet.
So one of the things that I really thought about in watching this film and seeing the intersex is that in the film and in my community, to not have running water or electricity, those things are frowned upon and they're seen as like living in poverty. But really that's the route that we as humans need to go back to, is, less is more, and, living in that harmony with the earth. That's really for us as Diné people, our deities are the water, the wind, they're our holy ones, and the relationship that we have to them is one of the most sacred things that we uphold. And so when things are fractured and imbalanced, then that is the fracturing and disconnect to our gods and goddesses. And so that's one narrative that I really hope to that gets changed, is that people not having running water or electricity shouldn't be seen or frowned upon as living in poverty, but that is the way that we should be aspiring to live. And in more modern terms, of course, but it says a lot about how far ahead we are in a capitalistic mindset.
I think you could still have running water and be in harmony with the earth.
If your water isn't contaminated, yeah, but in some places it's contaminated and that there's not that luxury anymore. Or it's a drought.
Yeah. I think it's also the idea of, if one person doesn't have something, it means that it's more valuable to the person who has it, right? And so it's, how do we make it so that everybody has access to clean water, that everybody has access to, if they want to turn on a light switch that doesn't harm a community. Or, there's so many different ways to go about it and move on from it. I loved growing up without running water and without electricity. I know so many handy skills. The apocalypse could hit and I will accidentally survive. And it's beautiful. I can plant a garden almost anywhere and make sure it flourishes. And there's so many different skills that come from it that I know that other people don't have access to. And I want everyone to have access to all of it. If you want to have a garden, I'm so sad for those people who are stuck in apartments and, they want, and they're asking and they're craving for just a little piece of soil to grow something or anything in, and they don't have that access. So in any way, it's always, if I can take it from somebody else, it gives it more power. And instead of just opening it up and allowing it to be shared equally and given, some people do want more than others and some people want less, and it's okay either way, as long as you're not, killing people.
If we could lift up the value of sharing as on a par with the value of owning and hoarding, we would be coming a long way, I think. And I learn constantly from the people I talk to on this program, and I'm learning from you today. Thank you both. It's just a pleasure to have you with us.
Thanks for having us. Although, Kim, you're the best person to talk to.
All right. Thank you both.